Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here for the August session of our Manuscript Mondays. The Manuscript Society has the mission of encouraging the collection and preservation of manuscripts and documents, to stimulate and aid collectors in their various collecting specialties, facilitate the exchange of information and knowledge among collectors, scholars, dealers, and the general public, and to promote the highest professional and ethical standards. The organization was founded in 1948 as the National Society of Autograph Collectors, but it includes not just collectors now, but also manuscript curators, librarians, dealers, and auction houses. And at first, it was primarily just Canada and the United States, and now we have members from Asia, Australia, Europe, and South America. In addition to Manuscript Mondays, the Manuscript Society publishes a quarterly journal, Manuscripts, and a quarterly newsletter, the Manuscript Society News. We also have a scholarship program. It is currently closed, but the Richard Mass Research Grant will be available again in the spring. And please visit the Manuscript Society website for more information. And also, finally, we hold an annual meeting offering members and attendees a fun-filled get-together and visits to memorial manuscript venues, both the United States and abroad. Our last meeting was in New York City in April, and this upcoming year in 2026 will be in Boston, Massachusetts. If you are a member of the Manuscript Society and want to help with that meeting, please let us know and reach out to us. We could definitely use some folks in the Boston area. Tonight's going to be a great event. We have Dr. Ravi Goel here to talk about his collecting. Dr. Goel earned a BA from Yale University and his medical degree from the Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. He completed a medical internship at the Cooper Health System and an ophthalmology residency at the Greater Baltimore Medical Center. He is an instructor at the Wills Eye Hospital in Philadelphia and a cataract surgeon at the Wills Eye Surgical Network in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And in addition to being a doctor and the busyness that comes with that, he also collects historical documents as a hobby. He has donated manuscripts and collections to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library, Amherst College, Dickinson College, Forest History Society, Harvard University, Minnesota Historical Society, Princeton University, Yale University, and the YIVO Institute. And today he is going to talk about his collecting regarding some materials regarding a Yale student. So, Dr. Goel, please take it away.
Thank you, Lee and Jay, and the board of the Manuscript Society for this wonderful invitation. As Jay mentioned, my name is Ravi Goel. I'm a ophthalmologist and cataract surgeon in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And today I'm going to be speaking about First to Answer Lincoln's Call and Rejected by Yale, Heber S. Thompson and the Power of Manuscripts. If you take a screenshot of this slide or any slide, you can go to my website, Protecting Site, which will take you to my historical documents collection online. And also, if you're any Yaleys out there, they just type in andforyale.com. It should get you to my collections. And perfect. So this is a picture of Sterling Memorial Library. And on the left, you notice a portrait in the lower left-hand corner of Edward Bouchet. And on the right, you'll notice another portrait of Edward Bouchet. When I was a freshman in Yale College in January 23rd of 1990, Yale put up this portrait, and they stated that Edward Bouchet was the first African-American student to attend Yale College. He was also the first to earn a PhD in the country, first African-American to earn a PhD in the country. As well, he was the first to be nominated and elected to Phi Beta Kappa among African-Americans. I remember being a freshman at Yale College, and I was one of those financial aid students, pre-med, South Asians. And I'm wondering that I said, they had to have made a mistake. There's no way that one individual could have accomplished this many great things. And if you look in the lower right-hand corner underneath the portrait, it says, first African-American to graduate from Yale, first African-American to be awarded a PhD in the United States, and the painter from 1983. In April of 2004, I was driving by, a friend had a barbecue, and I was driving by the Sunday morning YMCA auction in a town locally here, and I stopped by a postcard dealer at one of their auctions, and the postcard dealer had a binder like this, and I said, "Hey, do you have any postcards of Yale?" And he said, "Well, I have a binder with university postcards. Why don't you go through it?" So I went, I went from A to B to C, etc. I went back to the Y's, and there were a bunch of different postcards, and I was obsessed with this one postcard of Alumni Hall at Yale, which has since been razed. And I started reading the nice writing, 1911. And if you notice in the lower right-hand corner, you see the postmark from August 8th, 1911, and you see the words E.A. Bouchet, and you have to sort of figure it out underneath the postcard. At that point, I'm a cataract surgeon who can operate with a heart rate of 60. And at that point, my heart rate went up to the 120s. I looked up at the postcard dealer. I said, "How much do you want for this postcard?" And he said, "Well, the price is marked on the postcard. And if you looked up above the number, the word post on the postcard in the center, you'll see the number $4, which is what I paid for that postcard." I was so excited that I emailed Judith Ann Schiff, who's the chief research archivist at Yale University at the time. She passed a few years ago. But if you notice at the bottom of her email response to me, she said, "You certainly found a treasure when you purchased the postcard of Wright Hall. I'm forming a small Bouchet collection in manuscripts and archives, and if you should decide to donate your postcard at a future time, it would be a most welcome addition to our collection." At that point, I was hooked. In January of 2005, Yale published a story on the Yale Bulletin and Calendar, which is an internal newsletter, about a statue which was donated by the town of Zhuhai. I apologize if I mispronounce it, but Zhuhai, which is right near Macau. And they gave a statue of a gentleman named Young Wing. Young Wing was the first student to study in the United States, the first Chinese student to attend college in the United States. And he was a member of the Yale class of 1854. So in honor of his 150th graduation from Yale, in December of 2004, the municipal government of Zhuhai donated this statue of Young Wing. In November of that year, I was trolling the internet, and you know which site I'm probably referring to, but I was looking at letters of Yale students, and I love this letter because it says New Haven, June 26, 1851, and it was from a Yale student writing to a senior classmate, somebody who had graduated 4 years earlier, also from Munson Academy, where Young Wing studied. And I read the first page, looked okay. I read the second page, and I saw the word YWING. And once again, my heart rate went up to 120. It says that, "Oh my gosh, this is Young Wing." And the seller had no idea who this letter was by. But Young Wing was a freshman at Yale, a freshman, first year student at Yale College at that time. And I'd like to make note of what he said in the letter. "Now you know probably the many disadvantages in which I labor aside from these additional studies." And he was asking Mr. Booth, no relation I know of to John Wilkes Booth. He was asking Mr. Albert Booth to send him some study materials from New York. A few years later, in 2010, I stumbled upon a document, a quitclaim from Jacob Hemingway. So Yale was founded in October, November of 1701. And in March of 1702, Jacob Hemingway paid 30 or 60 shillings to Abraham Pearson, the first rector of Yale, and became the first student of Yale College. Now, the seventh president of Yale College was Ezra Stiles, who's a famous historian, a famous preacher, and he was prolific as a writer and a diary individual. And Reverend Jacob Hemingway, who had a church in New Haven, in East Haven, told this Yale seventh president that he, quote, was soulless, was all the college the first half year. So up until the 1750s, the early days of Yale College were pretty murky. And Jacob Hemingway, his church is still in New Haven, East Haven. And I emailed them a few days ago to send me his portrait from 125 years ago, but I never got a response. But there's no known portrait of Jacob Hemingway that exists. This is only the second quitclaim which exists of Yale's first son. What's most interesting about Jacob Hemingway is that he had 9 brothers and sisters, and his elder brother, Abraham, who was 6 years older than him, is the fifth great grandfather, and I'll give you a second to figure out who that photo is on the right hand side, but is the fifth great grandfather of Ernest Hemingway. And Ernest Hemingway's family would, as a family lore, would pass down that. It was also told the family legend that the first student at Yale was a Hemingway, and you can read that in Ernest Hemingway's sister's memoir, Marcellian Hemingway Sanford, where uh, the family would always say we were descended from the first student of Yale College. And Jacob Hemingway and his second wife are quitting claim to her, Sarah Hemingway's first husband's estate. He died, had an estate of about 6,000 shillings, and he left about 5 shillings to his daughter, his only daughter, because she had married a gentleman who was a member of the Church of England, which he had frowned upon. In November 2011, I was taking the train up to the Harvard Yale game, and I was bidding on a silver tray from a firm in North Carolina. Yale has many secret societies, senior societies, etc. But there's a club called the Elihu Club, which is the fourth known senior society at Yale College. The archivist for the auction house sent me a biography of each of the records. And if you notice on the left-hand side, you have the last name Armstrong, Barber, Brainerd, Dickey, Duncan, very common sort of, Protestant white names, in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. And then there's a name H.R. Cloud. And I said, who has the last name Cloud? The archivist sent me some introductory information to each of the members. And then I fell down the rabbit hole of Henry Roe Cloud, who was the first Native American to graduate from Yale College. And actually, right around that time, there was a biography published through Duke Press called The Yale Indian, which I read with great interest. About a year later, I was trolling the internet, and there was a gentleman who was selling beaded napkin ring holders from the estate of Henry Roe Cloud. And I emailed that gentleman. I said, why are you selling beaded napkin ring holders from the estate of Henry Roe Cloud? He said, I'm his great grandson. And I said, look, I'm not interested in beaded napkin ring holders. What else do you got? He said, he said, you know what? I own all his papers. I own his Yale degree, his high school degree, his master's degree. I own a bunch of photographs, and I own a couple of manuscripts. I said, okay, what do you want for it? And we negotiated. I sent him payment by PayPal, sight unseen. But he had called the Yale Library the year before, and he tried to sell these items to the university. And the university would accept donations, but they weren't going to pay for it. I gave him my word that I would donate these papers to Yale within 2 years after if he sold them to me. Now, as a financial aid student coming from Yale, this was a great triumph, because here it was, the first Native American of Yale College. And Yale College went from 12 colleges to 14 colleges in the years thereafter. And Henry Roe Cloud was rumored to be on the short list to have a college named in his honor. And one of the colleges that was named has since been named after Benjamin Franklin. So these are some photographs. I showed you the Yale degrees, and these are some photographs of Henry Roe Cloud. One photograph of particular interest to me was from the Elihu Club elections for Henry Roe Cloud, because Henry Roe Cloud was the first Native American to be elected to a secret society at Yale University, and he was elected in November of that year. And his great granddaughter wrote a recent biography in the last 10 years, and she said Henry Roe Cloud's classmate said to Henry Roe Cloud in his room, "What have you done? What have you done to deserve election to the Elihu Club? What have you done?" Charlie Munger, who I go to the Berkshire Hathaway meeting every year, and Charlie Munger, who was Warren Buffett's vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, says, the world is not driven by greed. The world is driven by envy. And you could see that in the words of Henry Roe Cloud's roommate at that time. And that story has been passed down through the family and thankfully has been documented. Well, what I love about Elihu Club is it gave me an entree to introduce this collection in June of 2013. So I bought the silver tray in 2011. I bought the papers from Henry Roe Cloud's great-grandson in November of 2012. And in June of 2013, I spoke with Senator Joe Lieberman, former candidate for Vice President of the United States, who was a member of the LU Club and who grew up in New Haven. And I said, Senator, I own the private papers of Henry Roe Cloud, who was in the LU Club. And he was very gracious as he listened to me, wax on for a good few minutes. A photo of Henry Roe Cloud has been featured in famous Yale students, which was within Yale University. This was sent to me by one of their former communications directors, Amanda Patrick, with great thanks. And also, when the great grandson said, "Yeah, there's an unpublished manuscript in these papers," I got the manuscript, and right before donation, I did detailed research, and I found the published work of this manuscript. And this is actually Henry Roe Cloud's famous manuscript, From Wigwam to Pulpit: A Red Man's Own Stories of His Progress from Darkness to Light. And I want to read these two sentences to you because I get so obsessed with the wording here. The original manuscript states, "I was born in a bark wigwam on the banks of the murky waters, Missouri River, probably in the winter of 1884. Life was very primitive in those days." Those are his original words. If you take a screenshot of this page, in the editor edited it as, "In the bark wigwam on the banks of the murky waters in Nebraska, where I was born, life was very primitive. Indians never kept birthday, but I probably arrived sometime in the winter of 1884." I don't agree with the editor's version. I think the original version is what really captures the spirit of Henry Roe Cloud. And as I often say when I speak about this, I think this is the basis of a senior essay for a future student in Yale College or any college. And you can even see in the first sentence of his obituary in the New York Times, "Henry Roe Cloud, a Yale graduate who was born in a wigwam on the banks of the Missouri River." In addition, the obituary for Henry Roe Cloud gets the dates of his graduations incorrect. In the last sentence, it says, "Dr. Cloud attended Oberlin College after getting his master's degree in anthropology at Yale." And that's not true. If we go back, you can see that he got his anthropology degree in 2013, and he got his master's in 2014. And actually, Yale President Salovey, in his first year in office, wrote about Henry Roe Cloud, and he also got the year of his master's incorrect. He got his master's in 2014. So this collection corrects errors in history. I love this document. This document is from Cheng Teng T. Wang, who was Yale class of 1910, who was a father of the Olympics in China. And he and Henry Roe Cloud were dear friends and chums. And 28 years after graduation, Henry Roe Cloud was based in Washington, D.C., and he was invited to the Chinese ambassador's residence for tea. And there were 400 folks who showed up in the snow. And make a long story short, Henry Roe Cloud is writing to his daughter, one of his four daughters, the youngest daughter, who is the grandmother of the gentleman who sold me these papers. And he said, he's writing to his daughter, "In the next room stood the ambassador in a long line of Chinese, the receiving line. I stepped up with my heart in my throat. When the ambassador said, 'Henry Cloud, how stout you are. What have you been eating?' I replied, 'Wild turkey and buffalo meat.' The dainty, sweet, pretty daughter standing next to him on the receiving line said sweetly, 'And butter, perhaps?'" This letter goes through Henry Roe Cloud's time in Washington, D.C. He was trying to get he had to buy a tuxedo, spend $50 for a tuxedo. He then, after going through the receiving line, he started to imbibe, and he put himself out there as being the ambassador of the Native Americans, and he was speaking with many other ambassadors as if he was an ambassador of the Native American states at this reception. He also wrote to his daughter saying, "I'm so glad of the opportunity to go to Washington. I can meet Senator Robert Taft and others there." Henry Roe Cloud and Robert Alfonso Taft were definitely friends. They both competed for the DeForest Prize, a very famous prize at Yale. Robert A. Taft was the son of the president, William Howard Taft, Yale class of 1878, while the president was in office, because Taft was in office from 1909 to 1913. And Robert A. Taft was Yale 1910. His father was 1878. And his grandfather, Alfonso Taft, was the founder of Skull and Bones in the class of 1833. So very much of a Yale family. So I want to sort of bring these two letters together. Young Wing, now you know probably the many disadvantages in which I labor aside from these additional studies. And then you have Henry Roe Cloud's granddaughter, or great-granddaughter, I apologize, granddaughter, Professor Renya Ramirez, who's on the West Coast. And she writes in her book, "One must remember the period and how difficult it must have been for him to succeed at Yale as the only Native American. So, as young Wing's friend Mark Twain would say, because young Wing lived in Hartford, Connecticut, as Mark Twain would say, history may not repeat, but it certainly does rhyme. If you get a chance, I'd recommend this opening address by former dean of Yale College, Mary Miller, which is on YouTube. And this sort of reads almost as a TED talk. I watched 500 TED talks in a row during the pandemic, and she writes, "Yet here is an astonishing number. Most art historians, and I'm one, she is one, would estimate that 99% of all such works ever made are lost to us." And this is a very powerful statement. As I consider historical documents to be art, and I think that 99% of documents are actually lost to us, and we're as fellow collectors and dealers and archivists and curators, we are looking at these documents and hoping to give us great insight on the past and potentially on the future. April 12th and 13th of 1861 was the Battle of Fort Sumter. And I won't bore you with the details, but the Confederate, it was a bloodless battle. And on April 18th, this is a telegraph, not mine. This is a telegraph in the National Archives in which the Major Robert Anderson sends a telegraph to the Honorable Simon Cameron, the Secretary of War, I believe, announcing his withdrawal from Fort Sumter. On April 15th, President Lincoln, I think this is in Lincoln's hand, President Lincoln declared a proclamation, and he asked for 75,000 volunteers to come and defend the U.S. Capitol. At that time, Yale was actually on recess between the second and third term, and there was a Yale senior at home in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. His name was Heber S. Thompson. And I've circled these key cities. Heber S. Thompson was in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. On April 17th, Heber S. Thompson he enlisted in a Pennsylvania regiment, one of 6 regiments. Those regiments went to Harrisburg. They then took a train to Baltimore. Now, when they arrived in Baltimore, they had to march from one train station to another in order to go to Washington, D.C. And during the 2-mile march, the first casualty of the Civil War occurred when Nicholas Biddle, who was an orderly to Captain Wren, was struck. And basically, the soldiers who were going from one train station to the other in Baltimore, they weren't connected, were being struck by Baltimore City residents. And Baltimore was a southern town. I did my residency in Baltimore. I didn't know that until I actually started residency, that Baltimore very much is a southern town. This is on April 18th. This is one day before the famous Baltimore riots, during which the Massachusetts militia had gotten to these great fights with the Baltimore locals. And this also in April 18th, there were locals who were throwing powder and whatever the equivalent of grenades are, hoping that a young soldier would light a cigarette, throw it out, and then explode one of the trains. So on April 18th at about 6 p.m., the regiments arrived in Washington, D.C., and they proceeded to the U.S. Capitol, during which they received their arms under the direction of President Lincoln. And President Lincoln walked up and down, shaking, I believe, every soldier's hand. And this is documented in a book which I'll mention in a moment. But so Heber S. Thompson was those regiments which arrived on April 18th, one day before the Massachusetts regiments arrived. Those who arrive on April 18th are forever known as the first defenders of the U.S. Capitol. They are the first defenders. On June 4th, Noah Porter, then senior member of the faculty, later 11th president of Yale, writes to a Yale son in battle. And I'm going to read this because it's so amazing. My dear sir, the faculty has directed me to write to you, advising you to come on to New Haven, if only for 3 or 4 days, in order to pass some sort of an examination. If possible, you better ask a furlough. If you cannot obtain one, you can come on as soon as your 3 months of service shall have expired. The faculty fully appreciates the circumstances with which you volunteered and the motives which induced you without hesitation to proceed at once for the defense of the capital. The examination will not be, I think the last word is scored, though I can't confirm that last word. But on behalf of Yale students, I'd love it if it said, the examination shall not be scored. Very truly, Noah Porter. And this is Heber S. Thompson's profile, a Yale son defending the US Capitol, in the book, The First Defenders by Heber S. Thompson. In addition, there is a petition signed by 20 of Heber S. Thompson's classmates, who include both future Union soldiers as well as Confederates. And they state simply, we humbly petition the faculty to admit him to the honor of graduation with his class. And this is a very eloquent, but they didn't give this to the faculty because after they wrote the petition after presentation day, which is a famous day, and the 20 folks signed it, including members of Skull and Bones and Scroll and Key, then the sort of like the head, one of the head classmates, Theodore Wincott, wrote, dear Thompson, on presentation day, we did this petition and we enlisted the faculty, and he basically gave this to Heber S. Thompson. You can imagine, here you have a Yale son at war in 1861, and these papers have survived till this day. And if you take a screenshot, serving today in the ranks and unable to obtain leave of absence long enough to say goodbye to his classmates, he has added to the lure. We all bear him a grateful pride in his patriotism. This is filled with amazing insights among classmates. So Heber S. Thompson received a 10-day furlough, and actually Heber S. Thompson wrote the book The First Defenders in 1910. He helped to found the First Defenders Association, and he served as one of its presidents. And I'm going to read this. Private Heber, he's writing about himself in the third person. Private Heber S. Thompson had been granted a furlough of 10 days to go to New Haven to take the biennial examinations of the senior class, of which he was a member. He passed the examinations and was graduated with his class, though on commencement day, he was on duty with his company at Fort Washington, Maryland. And I've circled Fort Washington, Maryland. You can see where that relates to Mount Vernon, Arlington, Washington, D.C., etc. And you can see a Yale son in battle as a soldier, as well as Heber S. Thompson in his older days. This, in addition, his classmates created this album for him, and I think many classmates have this. But basically, in absentia, his classmates created this album. I could take 3 screenshots because there are about 9,700 photographs, and there are many poignant messages to a Yale classmate. I will point out 3 of them, which give me great interest. One is from Franklin Bowditch Dexter, and he was a member of Skull and Bones, Yale's original secret society, but he was literally the author of Yale history, one of the great authors of Yale history. This is his profile from the Yale Skull and Bones catalog, which I own, one of them anyway. And he was served as assistant librarian of Yale and secretary of the university for 30 years. But he wrote this 5-volume set. Many of the histories of Yale students, which I rely on, come from Yale biographies and annals. And actually, for many years of those who graduated after 1815, the obituaries for Yale are written by Dexter and his colleagues. And he write, God bless you wherever you go, and he offers them peace and prosperity. A second classmate who wrote to Heber S. Thompson was Stanford Newell. And Stanford Newell, I will always be welcome when I find you in the future, as you will be wherever and in whatever circumstances you happen to cross the faith of. And Stanford Newell wrote very poignantly also by telling his Yale classmate, while most of us have been bidding one another a last farewell, you have been, quote, serving your country. We can call ourselves the best of friends. And what makes Stanford Newell very famous is the fact that he was ambassador to The Hague, and he was one of, and actually in the album, Heber S. Thompson includes this newspaper clipping from April 7th of 1899, and it includes the delegates to the Tsar's conference, which is the conference in the Hague in 1899, which basically was going to look at the Lieber Bill, one of the bills signed by Abraham Lincoln, on the rules of war. So Stanford Newell was one of the United States' 6 delegates to that conference. And what's most amazing is that one of the other delegates, of the 6 delegates, 2 of them were Yale. And not only that, but 2 of them were Skull and Bones. The president of the delegation was Andrew Dixon White, Yale class of 1853, who was also the first president of Cornell. But you can see Andrew Dixon White is the first name there, and Stanford Newell is the second name. 2 Yale men, 2 Skull and Bones men who are serving their country in The Hague in 1899. And this is the classic photo of the first Hague conference in 1899. I asked ChatGPT where the American delegation was seated, and they wouldn't tell me. But so that still is some homework I have for the future. The third is just as a powerful um, uh, um, classmate who I'd like to honor this evening, and that is George Warman. George Warman, he died as a prisoner of war in Alabama. He died very young, thus his signature is ultra rare. And he wrote, "God help you and bring you back safely to your friends." And George Warman, he started Yale later in life because he died at the age of 32. So he actually started in Yale College almost at the age of 30. But these are kids. These are kids going to college. They became teachers and preachers, and members of who were active members of the public, farmers, etc. And these are just 3 of the many letters that are in this album. So you can imagine the Noah Porter letter, which I read about defending the U.S. Capitol, and I like to time my gifts around certain events, usually around my reunions. My 30th reunion was in 2023, and it was also 2 years after January 6th. And I found great value in the paper, so I offered it to Yale. And I currently have 8 named collections at Yale. Again, the financial aid student. I attended financial aid Yale. I had classmates who came from 7, 8, 9, 10-figure families, and they made that note on campus. And and that this was sort of my great passion to give back to the university. And I'll read you the second paragraph. "Give it limits on our capacity to process and make materials available to researchers, we regret that we must turn down all but the most extraordinary offers, and this unfortunately includes even some of the most relevant material for our collections." A big plug for university libraries. University libraries have budgeting issues like anyone else, and Yale actually has at the time had sort of run out of space to accept new gifts. But I wanted to, once I decided to give papers away, I decided to give them away because I want them to be enjoyed by researchers and students and scholars. And so Yale actually did me the biggest favor in the world, because a few weeks later I offered them to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library, and I emailed Ian Patrick Hunt. I hope he's on the call, PhD, sometime around 10 p.m. in the evening. And by noon the next day, he had accepted the collection. And we had about an hour or 2 call. And I wanted to make the stipulation of the gift. I said, Ian, I will give you this gift, but as a stipulation, one of my brothers who's on the call is a great collector of Lincoln history. I said, I want a private audience with one of the 4 or 5 copies of the Gettysburg Address, which the Lincoln Library owns. I'm going to travel out to Springfield with my family, and I want a private audience. And Ian Hunt said, Ravi, that's a great ask, but the Gettysburg Address is placed on public display for 2 weeks out of the year. Outside of those 2 weeks, you need an act of the governor in order to see the Gettysburg Address in private. And so if anyone has any pull with Governor Pritzker, I'd be most appreciative. But he did offer to show me many other great documents which they have. And I enjoyed his comment here. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for the generosity. It is remarkable that this highlights a crucial moment in our nation's history when individuals from across the North refused to ignore or accept the South's unprovoked attack on the United States military. And when we spoke candidly, he said, Ravi, we have very limited materials from April of 1861. And these papers may hopefully go on display one day. And if they do, I am going to make that trip out there. So I want to sort of bring this full circle. I think my siblings are on this call. And I got that rejection from Yale on February 9th of 2023. And that was on the Thursday before the Super Bowl. So the only thing worse than getting rejected for a collection which I fell in love with was the fact that the Eagles lost the Super Bowl. And sort of like this sort of poetic justice. When we attended the Super Bowl this year, this was the day, or within a few days, when the the Lincoln Presidential Library had actually posted the original finding aid. It's still in draft mode, but the finding aid for the collection, which I donated in December of 2024. So just 2 minutes after that, our Eagles won the Super Bowl, the second in 7 or 8 years. I might leave this up for the rest of the talk, but I'm a great lover of Abraham Lincoln. My wife and I, on occasion, will be invited to private showings of documents. And at the Yale Library, Yale owns the gold pen used by Abraham Lincoln. And if you have a moment, you can look at February 24th, 1929. It was Lincoln's messenger. Lincoln gave his copy, the pen that he used to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, to his messenger, Mr. Louis Bergdorf. And the family signed off affidavits, members of the Treasury in 1899, that was his copy, which was sold in 1929 and donated to the university. On the right is a competing pen that to use to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, which is part of the Livermore papers at the Massachusetts Historical Society. So Lincoln may have given it to the actual pen to abolitionist George Livermore. And so I'm not sure which pen is the real pen. I'd love a historian to get in touch with me. But if anyone loves hearing Dorothy Kearns Goodwin, waxes poetic when she talks about Abraham Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation. And this quote is from LincolnCollection.org. If my name ever goes into history, it will be for this act, and my whole soul is in it. If my hand trembles when I sign the proclamation, all who examine the document hereafter will say, quote, he hesitated. And Lincoln had shaken thousands of hands that day. It was New Year's Day of 1863. And so he apparently stood up, he calmed his hand, he sat down, and he made a bold signature on the Emancipation Proclamation. So this has never been seen before too. This is in my private collection, with a shout out to my brother Al. We were flipping documents and rare books on some websites like 20 years ago. He said, Ravi, I'm collecting these Lincoln books. And I said, well, I started tracking Lincoln. And here's the only signed copy I've been able to find, which says John C. Bancroft with affection of his father, George Bancroft, August 1866. After Lincoln died, Congress commissioned George Bancroft to give an address on the life of President Lincoln to the U.S. Congress. There are about 2,000 or 3,000 of these copies made. The frontispiece is the most valuable piece of it, and members of Congress used to hand them out to constituents. But there aren't that many copies in this condition anyway that have survived. I'd like to give a shout out to my class. I said I had dinner or lunch with a friend of mine who was a year elder than me in Yale, Chris Rabb. We didn't know each other in college, but we had this delightful lunch. And he said, Ravi, he's a descendant from Philip Livingston. Philip Livingston is Yale class of 1737. He's one of the 4 Yale men who signed the Declaration of Independence. And Livingston and his 4 brothers, one of whom was the first governor of New Jersey, William Livingston, attended Yale. And their father, Colonel Philip Livingston, endowed the first professorship at Yale College. And here you could see my classmate, the Honorable Chris Rabb, who's now a member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, and I think he's dropped his name in the hat for an open seat for member of Congress in the next election cycle. But you can see him standing with a carving in Branford College, Yale, which says Colonel Philip Livingston of Livingston Manor, New York, in honor of Colonel Philip Livingston, the father who endowed the first professorship. But they are, sort of just like the Hemingways, the Rabbs, the family lore. We are descended from the first student of Yale College. We are descended from the signer, Philip Livingston. And because of him, I started collecting Philip Livingston. I own some signer documents, but I love this document. This is a document between Stephen Van Rensselaer and another member of his family selling some property in New York. And it appears to be signed 4 times by Philip Livingston Jr., Philip Livingston Jr. being the signer, Yale class of 1737. And I authenticate it with these 4 signatures on top, which are from my document, and then another document from 1751, known signature, as well as Philip Livingston's 1776 declaration signature. A shout out to my friends at Dartmouth College. 20 years ago, I purchased a copy from the original of the first the document of the president of Dartmouth College, Eleazar Wheelock, who was Yale class of 1733, and John Smith, appointing John Smith as the first professor of Dartmouth College. And right before I donated to Yale, I emailed the Rauner Library. I said, my copy clearly says copy from the original. Do you have the original? And in 1908, in the Dartmouth Alumni Weekly, it's documented the original as being existed, but they were no longer found in Wheelock's papers. So if a Dartmouth curator wants to sort of experience Dartmouth history in the first person, they can make their way over to Yale Library, to the Beinecke Library and Manuscripts and Archives. As I've sort of mentioned, I'm sort of obsessed with JFK. This is a picture of JFK receiving an honorary degree in 1862, and he spoke about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And 20 years ago, I bid on this letter and I lost, and I was livid. This is the letter that an associate university librarian sent to the White House on June 26 of 1962, thanking the president for donating his typed manuscripts to the university. I bid on it in open auction and I lost. 5 or 10 years later, it came up for auction again and I won. And these are part of my private papers. And I hope that Yale accepts this letter one day. But the sort of the White House mark is what adds the value. And I also own this press photo on the right hand side, which is just majestic of our 35th president receiving an honorary Yale degree. And he said in his speech, I now have the best of both worlds, a Harvard education and a Yale degree. 20 years ago, I bought this home movie from the Harvard class of 1904's 25th reunion. I bought it from a guy who was trying to declutter in his 100 square foot apartment in New York City. It was from his grandfather's Harvard class. Long story short, this is FDR's Harvard class of 1904. And I bought the film. I sent it off to homemoviedepot.com to get it converted to a DVD. And they sent me a 3-minute video. I will not play the video because I donated this video to the Harvard Archives, which is now a part of the Ravi D. Goel collection on Harvard. But you can see in the right, you can see Eleanor Roosevelt. There's about 12 seconds of Eleanor Roosevelt walking on the Harvard campus. So the spouse, the mother, the niece of Harvard graduates, who was rumored to be the first female to be given an honorary Harvard degree in 1954. She was on campus and she was not given that honorary degree. Helen Keller was in 1955. But Eleanor Roosevelt, this is the earliest known video, home movie of Eleanor Roosevelt walking on the Harvard campus, which I donated to the Harvard Archives in 2023. And here you see, this is not my copy, but the FDR library, I paid $200 for the FDR's file folder when he was governor. He was elected chief marshal at Harvard in 1929. And this is a huge honor. It's the most prominent member of the 25th reunion class. And I'm at my time, but who gets the honorary degree. And FDR said, this is a greater honor than being elected governor of New York. Finally, I want to give a shout out to my friend Heather Smith. She said, this is in 2017, I'm at an estate sale, found this. I can get it for you if you want. And it was John J. Slocum's James Joyce collection correspondence. John J. Slocum was a Harvard grad in 1936 who donated the James Joyce collection to Yale. And these were his remaining papers, which remained part of his private estate, including the letter from Yale saying, we're sending you this second check, for $5,800. Heather told me that there was one manuscript, but there were actually 2 manuscripts from James Joyce's business manager, Paul Leon. Paul Leon was captured by the Nazis and assassinated in 1943, but his widow wrote the manuscript on the left, and James Joyce's brother wrote the manuscript on the right. And these are draft copies, which are part of my collection at Yale at the Beinecke. This is the one piece which I haven't yet had the heart to give to the university, and this is a telegram which was sent by John J. Slocum to Mr. Babb, who's the librarian. I think Babb's name is on the John F. Kennedy document. And it's very simple, and it's just so beautiful, from Germany, saying, can Yale print Joyce? And long story short, John J. Slocum and Henry Calhoun, wrote the definitive bibliography of James Joyce, which was published by the Yale University Press. So, as Simon DePury, the auctioneer, says, collecting is a wonderful illness, and I thank you for indulging me in my wonderful illness. And with that, I open up to questions. Uh,
Ooh, thank you, Ravi. That was excellent. Appreciate it. If you have any questions, you can, if you want to ask it in person, raise your hand. Otherwise, add it to the Q&A or the chat and we'll follow up. I'll ask the first question, Ravi.
Please.
How do you decide who to donate materials to?
Yeah, that's a great, that is Jay, thank you for that question. I've always given Yale the right of first refusal. And I think I had 3 or 4 collections. And yeah, I think the university does me a favor when they turn collections down, because you want collections to be in a place. And I should mention actually the Philip Livingston collection Yale turned down, and they suggested I give it to the New York Public Library recently. But you want documents to be in a place where they'll be enjoyed, and where a researcher, and you and I have spoken about this, where a researcher is coming, and and a good librarian or curator can say, hey, we know that you're researching James Joyce and the James Joyce collection, but hey, there's another collection by Ravi Goel over there. You might want to take a look at these papers, because not everything's been documented, not everything's been scanned, not everything's online. So quite honestly, I was offered I got some advice from a historian who's in Tennessee after Yale turned down the Heber S. Thompson collection, and he offered to accept the collection for his university in Texas, and I felt bad, but I did turn him down for 2 reasons. One is they didn't have a lot of Lincoln stuff, and secondly, I don't want to put myself in the corner here, but you could sort of, it's hard for me to get to Texas, and sort of other reasons, but and sort of how states treat various folks. But I think that I just wanted to be enjoyed. The passion of the collector is that many of the great collections I've purchased, I figured out what the mistake that other collectors make is that you collect something, you don't tell your spouse about it, you don't tell your kids about it, you pass, they don't know what to do with it, but the kids keep it, their grandkids keep it, the great grandkids are like, what the heck, they're trying to declutter, and that stuff ends up at Goodwill or on eBay or whatever. So that's part of the reason why I'm giving this stuff away in my lifetime, I want it to be enjoyed. And so there's a lot of Googling involved.
I have another question. Where do you look for this material? Just
So
give us
Jay, I
some.
mean, I will give you, I will tell you what a friend, an acquaintance friend of mine who's a Harvard graduate asked me. We were at a meeting. She came up to me. She said, Ravi, my family collects historical documents also. We own this, we own this, we own this. And then she got really inquisitive. She said, where do you collect? Where do you do this? And collectors, it's interesting. Collectors have, you know, these sorts of things will find you if you know where to look and you have a real passion for them. There are those who collect because they want a financial return. And I think if I wanted a financial return, I quite honestly would just see more patients. I'd see an extra hour of patients a day, and it would be that. But you could sort of search, the internet 20 years ago, Google Books didn't exist, and now Google Books exists, and you could learn about collecting. You could eBay, all these different sites, auction houses, and various other, sort of areas. But that's how I search.
Okay. Um, as you know, we've talked before, so I work at William Mary. So if you have anything that matches up with Virginia and William Mary, just reach out.
I will indeed.
Like Yale, I can understand about this resources to get things processed in the space, but my idea is that the quicker you fill up the space, they've got to get more space for you, hopefully.
Yeah,
Let me
Yale just joined a consortium with Princeton and some other universities. I heard it's gonna open up more space because Princeton has like a big, storage facility, North Jersey somewhere. But yeah, I mean, if anyone has um, let me read this question from Mr. Barton Smith. Some say that those who buy a manuscript are more likely to care for it than the institution gets it as a gift. Um, you know, I agree with that to some degree. The question is, you know, when I was thinking about the Heber S. Thompson collection, I was thinking about 2061, and I was thinking about the 200th anniversary. And when in 2061, there's going to be a Yale student writing about the Civil War and the earliest days of the Civil War, and they're going to have to go to the Lincoln Library to find stuff on Yale history. Um, um, so I think that I do agree with you, but don't forget there's a cost to owning manuscripts. There's a storage cost. There's an insurance cost. There's a migraine cost. I mean, there's sort of like you're wondering, and are you? The other thing is that if you own a manuscript that's unpublished, it technically has more value than a manuscript that's published. That's why on my blog and one of my siblings, I used to post my finds on Facebook and this and that. And I'm on a private chat group with my sister and two brothers, and they said, stop doing that. Other people are starting to track you on what you buy, and they may try to mimic you. But their point was also that once you publish a manuscript, it sort of loses some of its financial value because then it's sort of easily, it's already been published. So, but I think institutions, um, I think it really comes down to having a good relationship with curators and institutions, and they're very willing to meet with you. I have librarians who want to come meet with me, and they want to and they give you great ideas. You'll learn a lot. If you want to learn something, start reading library reports. University reports. You'll get a lot of ideas there. There's another question I'll call her out from my niece Alicia. What collecting project do you have next on your list? I think that I've actually, not that I've stopped collecting, but it's hard because I have stuff, and I want to kind of declutter myself. So I do have uh, I still collect Yale history. I have a collection it extends to Harvard and presidential and JFK and FDR, and also uh, you could sort of go down the rabbit hole of different folks. But I'm gonna read this next one from my other niece, Serena. Really enjoyed hearing about some of the first students from the diverse background at Yale. Some of the letters alluded to challenges they faced based on their backgrounds. Did you ever come by anything more specific about how they were treated by their classmates? That's a great question, Serena. And I'll tell you that Edward Bouchet, another classmate, had written that he was believed to be the first Yale student never to set foot in a Yale fraternity. So Yale had freshman societies, sophomore societies, junior fraternities, and senior societies. And he was the son of his mother was a servant and his father also. But here you have this student, Edward Bouchet. And Edward Bouchet is actually the second student at Yale College because there was a guy named Robert Henry Green in Yale class of 1854, who many years later was believed to be the first African American to attend Yale. And I offered to buy those documents. They were at a public auction, and Yale cobbled together 5 figures. And they said, "Dr. Goel, please stand down because we're going to try to bid on them." But yeah, those I don't have anything about about Young Wing. I do know that Henry Roe Cloud, the first Native American, was treated as a campus hero. Like, he was very well known. He was a great orator and the like. But I can't tell you how Young Wing was treated. But the Young Wing, he was recruited to the United States very young. He attended Munson Academy, which is about 50 miles north of Yale. So I think he may have been more assimilated. I mean, Young Wing's amazing because he was friends with Mark Twain, and he actually had to come back in secret, for various reasons in the early 1900s. But have you ever considered working with any filmmakers regarding any of these papers you've uncovered? This is part of the reason why I'm doing this webinar, Sheena. Hollywood loves historical dramas, and it would be a cool way to tell these stories to more people. I think that we collectors have a certain mindset and a certain personality. And I think that, tonight I wanted to share, these collections. I will tell you one funny story is that I got a call from somebody who owns a storage facility, because she owns collections similar to what I gave to Amherst, George Herbert Driver, who was a prolific writer, theologian, preacher. and she wanted to sell me his papers because somehow somebody left them in storage. So the problem with doing too many webinars, that does create value for for competitors. Which document from my brother? Which document is your all-time favorite? I think the next document I buy will be my all-time favorite, and the document I'm looking for is the letter from I'll just put it out there. It's a letter from JFK. If anyone has it, please let me know. That says, dear Marilyn, great to see you last night, Jack. That would be my all-time favorite, and I would retire from collecting from that day. I probably would give it to Harvard at that point. But um, let's see here. Jay, we've hit the 2-minute mark. I do want to.
Any more questions from anybody?
I do want to give a shout out to the Manuscript Mondays, which are free. And the speaker from 2 months ago actually gave a talk on Hemingway, which made me add the genealogy of Hemingway family from the Find a Grave, actually. But this has been quite an honor to share a passion. I mean, it's sort of like just like the host of the Founders podcast. We just have a passion for these. Collectors have a passion, and it's amazing to be able to share this with collectors, dealers, the public, and budding historians.
Thank you very much, Ravi, and thanks for everybody for attending. Stay tuned for information coming up in a few weeks for our September Manuscript Monday, and please look out the manuscripts.org site for membership information. And if you're interested, I'll tell you, visiting and going to behind the scenes tours of a lot of different institutions in New York and now Boston. San Antonio was awesome. It's really great annual meeting, and you meet a lot of great people, great connections, and it's a great group. And thank you, Ravi, again for what you're doing on collecting this material and sharing it with everybody, and not just holding it and enjoying it for yourself. So thank you very much, and thank you for everybody attending. Have a great evening.
Thank you.